Much has been written in the press over the last several decades about organized crime in Colorado. There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of facts, and a lot of in between. One of the things that's probably well established is if you look at the photograph above the printer behind me, you'll see what is marked as a chart from the Organized Crime Manual in Denver. On it are several prominent Italians, and they're identified as mafia dons, soldiers, capos, the regular stuff that was developed under the Valachi inquiries of structures of organized crime. It's been my experience as a criminologist that some of that exists, some of it doesn't. A lot of it is a schematic developed by the Justice Department in order to fit pieces together that ordinarily wouldn't fit and then make sense out of them. If you take that on the drug trade, for instance, back in the 60s, a lot of college students would get together, pool their money, and one of them would drive to Tucson and pick up some weed and come back and redistribute it or divvy it out, like what I used to do when I was in high school with beer. If you're a kingpin or not, then that depends on what trip you were busted. If you were the one elected to go to Tucson on that trip, you were the kingpin. It might be somebody else the next time. The government really didn't care, but they could form a structure and then set up an informer system and things like this. So we have a group they refer to as the Smaldones. And, as Caesar would say, omnia Gallia and patres tres dividis est, which is all of Gaul, is divided into three parts. We can say the same thing about the Colorado Mafia, supposedly. We have one part in Denver, we have another part in Pueblo, and another part in Canyon City. Well, these parts came together at Mr. Pauldino's restaurant to work out a truce between some of them. Key to the truce was a young Turk named Joey Nucci. And Nucci had a expensive diamond from Mr. Smaldone, and when asked to return it by Mr. Smaldone, told Mr. Smaldone to go to hell. So there were jockeying back and forth on various negotiations, and it settled down that there was going to be a meeting at this creamery on 38th and Navajo Street in Denver. I had a security interest in there because I took it as part payment on some of the work I was doing for Mr. Pauldino. Anyway, at the restaurant, there was Mr. Smaldone, who was supposed to be the head guy. Another guy from Pueblo named Joe the Ram Salardino. Actually, Salardino was from Canyon City, I'm sorry. Another guy with Mr. Pauldino was Tony Ciccarelli. And a third guy there, or a fifth guy there, named Nucci, who was about 28, 29 years old and was the young Turk of the emerging organized crime group in Denver. My own personal belief is this group, even though it's been written about by a guy named Crick and another one in a book called Mountain Mafia, was sort of a bumbling Keystone Cops type of situation. And they weren't seriously an organized crime group like you would see in, say, New York, Chicago, LA, etc. But they were involved in bookmaking and loan sharking and some alcohol distribution, I guess, among other things. The last known gangland slaying had been in the 50s with a guy that they called Walkie Talkie Roberts. There was a reason for him to be called Walkie Talkie, but he was the last so-called mafia slaying in Colorado at that time. Well, 30 years later, we have the meeting in the creamery. And one of the participants to the meeting demanded that he get his diamond back. And Nucci said, well, fuck you, I'm not giving it back to you. And then there was an argument that ensued, and Nucci pulled out a gun. And he pointed the gun at Mr. Smaldone and said, "You're done in this town, Checkers," and he pulls the trigger. And the gun went click. Smaldone faints. Ciccarelli grabbed the cataract glasses from Joe the Ram and did a jig on them on the floor. So imagine this scene. You have a misfiring .38 held by a young would-be mafiosa, pulling the trigger, going click, click, click. You got the Don or Godfather, whatever the hell you want to call him, fainting on the floor of the creamery. You have another older guy with cataract eyes fumbling around on the floor looking for his glasses. A third tall, skinny guy stomping up and down on the glasses, doing a jig on them. And everybody shouting and yelling. And nothing really happening. But it's total disarray. It's like Keystone Cops. Or a clown circus. Who knows what it's like? I wasn't there, but I can only imagine. From the descriptions I got from the participants, it was a cluster jerk. Anyway, Smaldone recovers. He pulls out his pistol, points it at Nucci, and his pistol goes off. And it hits Nucci in a button. The button goes around the rib cage and out the back. And everybody comes down and says, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" Well, they put Nucci in a car, haul him off to the hospital, and regroup. One group goes this way, the other one goes that way, and now they're wondering what Nucci's going to do. Well, the reason Nucci's gun misfired is another client of mine had given it to an intermediary to give it to Mr. Nucci, and it was a .38. But there are two types of .38s, I guess. One is a rimfire and one is a centerfire pistol. Well, whatever it was the wrong fire. And it didn't go off because he had the wrong ammunition in it. Apparently he didn't know which ammunition to use, or his gun skills weren't quite up to par, what the average mafioso learns. I don't know. But in any way, organized crime people go visit Nucci in the hospital. And he says, they're going to kill you, Nucci. You better join with us. You better rat off Mr. Smaldone or whomever you can. Otherwise, we're going to tell people that you did inform and put you on the highest tier in the jail and tell everybody you're working for us and see how long it takes them to throw you off the third tier of the jail. Your choice. Well, when they made him the offer, he couldn't refuse. He agreed to cooperate. Now, remember, we had a one-term congressman that somehow got involved with the FBI and the CIA, and as a reward got to go to Congress. He went to Congress and he manufactured the Denver Mafia and put out a book describing the Denver Mafia, a page of which you can see behind me. And they were just establishing an organized crime strike force in order to fight the organized crime that they could put together to show exists in Denver. Lots of other things were going on, dope deals, things like that. More particularly the CIA was smuggling heroin and corpses from Saigon, Thompson Airport, to an airport in California, and thence to an airport, or airbase, I guess is more technically the term. So it went from Travis Air Force Base to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. There it was sort of unloaded, and the heroin went up the San Luis Valley into Pueblo for distribution, and the corpses went on home. Sometimes they would unpack the corpses at Travis. I'm not real certain how the operation went. I know that was the operation, according to my sources. So that was going on in Denver while they were trying to manufacture the organized crime to divert attention to various people in Colorado to keep them from figuring out about the heroin operation the CIA was running. It's really interesting. It was reported to me by one of my informers that this one county in Colorado, all of the deputy sheriffs there had brand new Lincolns. Another one was driving up the San Luis Valley when a prosecutor accidentally fell out of the car and hit a bridge abutment and consequently died. A lot of other strange things happening there. Another group of one of my clients, who was a CIA front, landed a plane on my law partner's ranch in southern Colorado. It was a DC-6 or a DC-7, which kind of pissed off my partner because he thought I had something to do with it. And I really didn't, but that can be confirmed if you look at some files from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence on Vortex Aviation. The principal there was one of my clients. In any event, Nucci decided to cooperate, and he decided to testify against a crime that he knew about, and that involved Ciccarelli and Pauldino and some other people. There was a fairly well-to-do group of investors in Denver that built warehouses, and these honest guys used to have burglaries or pilfering or whatever at their warehouses. Now, they were honest guys because Brutus, describing Caesar, said he was an honorable man, where he came to bury Caesar, not to praise him. But Brutus was an honest man. I've been told that these warehouse people were honest people too. But every year for several years, at inventory time around January 1st, all warehouses are required to take inventory, and they have an inventory tax. And that's when they reconcile their books and everything else. Well, this particular warehouse had break-ins, generally in December or January of every year, and they always had shortage on their inventory, and they'd file an insurance claim and get reimbursed for it. Now, the rumors underground were that they arranged the burglaries for themselves, and they paid somebody to knock in a wall and stage a fake burglary so they had evidence to claim their losses on their insurance. My clients maintained that that was the real situation, but it didn't matter because the warehouse guys were not Italian. They happened to be Jewish, but that's another matter. But the Italians got the blame and got the indictments and got the prosecutions because they got the headlines and the publicity for the organized crime strike force. So they indict the Italians for burglary. The warehouse people on the insurance fraud get immunity so they can testify to the burglary. Of course, they don't testify that they hired the burglars in the first place. Um, you had to be in on the criminal group in order to know that. And of course, the organized crime strike force people who came to the strike force, many of them from Air America, weren't bright enough to ask that question on their investigations. So we go to trial. And it's kind of a funny trial, and they bring out all this stuff about these Italians. And after 6 days of trial, the jury goes out, and one of the alternate jurors that was dismissed came up to us and said, "Which one of the defendants is the mafia don?" And I look at the lady and I say, "What?" She says, "Who was the godfather?" One of my fellow attorneys said, "What are you talking about, ma'am?" Well, every time we'd go in for recess, we discussed, and we had bets on who was the head mafiosa in charge of this. We knew it was a mafia case just because of the names, and we read the papers. So I looked at the woman and I said, "Well, who do you think the mafia don was?" And she said, "Well, I think it was your client." I said, "Why was that?" He said, "Well, he was the most distinguished looking. He had gray hair and well manicured, well groomed, and you did most of the talking." So another defense attorney looked at her and said, "Well, would you tell that to the judge, please?" "Oh, I'd be happy to," she says. So we go back in chambers and move for mistrial on the basis that the jurors didn't follow the judge's instructions and were talking to each other during breaks. Well, when the judge, he chased everybody out of chambers and blew a stack or did something to that effect. I don't know. Maybe he did a joint. I don't know, really. All I do know is for some reason the feds had his courtroom bugged, which is a whole different story that we'll go into later. That's how serious the strike force people were. They didn't trust anybody, and they felt that they had God on their side, so they could commit any kind of violation or breach of ethics or crime even, as long as they were the government and they were the good guys. So the bad guys get a new trial with a pissed off judge because we just wasted 6 days of trial and he had to give us another trial, which meant it was deal time because most of the defendants had cases already, and Mr. Pauldino had a travel act case involving gambling in Nebraska, I believe it was. And the Supreme Court just turned that one down. So I was in a position that we had to have resentencing. And all of us had similar problems with various clients. So we got together with the various U.S. attorneys from various jurisdictions and prosecutors and things like that and worked out deals for everyone where we could combine sentencing between all the jurisdictions and come up with one term, which made everybody happy and saved the judge from having to publicly be embarrassed about having a mistrial on his jury. Well, it ended well for everybody apparently, and the organized crime got the conviction headline. I think the headline read, "Mafia defendants plead guilty" or some dipshit thing like that. But this is a different view than what you get from the press, because it's my view from a defense attorney's point of view, and I probably have a jaundiced view. I just have been to too many of these, one of which involved bribing NFL referees, various other things like that. Well, FBI forging documents and manufacturing evidence. Another case where FBI was trained at the psychological warfare places. Their agents were psychologists, and they manipulated a client of mine using brainwashing tactics. In fact, that trial I had the brainwash expert from the Korean War brainwash studies testify on my client's behalf, and also another guy who taught counter-psychological warfare techniques at Fort Benning also testified for the defendant. But this type of stuff has been going on, and at least to my knowledge, since the Nixon administration. The only ones that went on prior to that was things like the Denver police burglary scandal, where 60 Denver cops got convicted of burglary and sent off to prison. That's generally been the crime scene around Denver for the last several decades, at least stemming from the time when the Ku Klux Klan used to run Denver. So, enough of the history. I hope this gets you thinking. I would just as soon somebody make comments like, what am I smoking? Or when I gotta reverse my rectal cranial inversion, or various other slanderous things that I can get a chance to explain and get more into the background of this stuff. Or if you really want, you can call me on the phone or stop by and I'll show you in my files where a lot of this exists. I can show you transcripts. I can show you files from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I can show you files that the CIA has given me, files that various agents have given me, and it's time at my age, as the dangerous dinosaur, close to the end of my time, to at least talk about this and bring it forth, and hopefully people will debate it. You know, you can think I'm a damn liar or smoking dope or dropping acid all the time, but I can assure you these tales are true, and that I can back everything up that I say. So I hope you can challenge me or ask me more or ask some questions. I'd be happy, very happy, to answer them. I'm looking forward to some feedback. I'm looking forward to some of you go out there saying, Blewett, you're crazy. Or, why are you saying this? Where did you get this from? Where did you get that from? How do you make this up? Things like this. So I'm either got to conclude nobody's watching this shit, or nobody cares. I don't know which one it is, but I'm going to continue until I get some reaction. Thanks for watching. This is the Dangerous Dinosaur going to bed.